As soon as my intoxicated wife revealed that she was no longer attracted to me, I departed without uttering a single word. But she was caught off guard by what transpired after that. I never imagined that things would get to this point. Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine that I would one day wake up and immediately doubt all I believed I understood about my relationship. At the beginning of the evening, I was waiting for her to get home from a long shift at work, just like every other night was. It was late, but not in an exceptionally late manner. She was always exhausted when she arrived, and she was typically only able to conduct a conversation for a short period of time before either disintegrating onto the sofa or going directly to bed. But things didn't feel quite right that evening. The sound of the front door slamming behind her was far louder than it would have been otherwise. She arrived later than usual. The door was not the only problem. It was the burdensome and uneven sound of her footfall that reverberated through the corridor, giving the impression that she was dragging herself along. My assumption was that she was simply more exhausted than usual. Even before I saw her, I had a feeling that something was off. She had a heated face, her eyes were only partially closed, and her stance was unstable. What's up? In spite of the fact that I knew how much she detested being questioned about her day after a long shift, I welcomed her with a low voice. Initially, she did not provide a response. In its place, she proceeded to go by me and into the kitchen, where she opened and closed cabinets without any particular purpose before removing a bottle of wine. Her motions were jerky, which seemed a little excessive for someone who was having a difficult day at work. It was difficult for me to determine the cause of the sudden tension that I felt in the air. An alteration had taken place. "How are you doing?" Using caution, I inquired. When she turned to face me, her eyes were scattered. "Okay, I'm doing fine. I've just had a difficult night." Her grin was little and contrived. Even though I could tell that she was intoxicated, I chose not to comment on the matter. I was completely unaware of how far the drinking had gone. The bottle of wine was slightly trembling in her hands as she poured herself a glass of wine, and I observed as she did it. Although I was concerned since I had never seen her in such a state before, I refrained from pressuring her. It may have been the wine, or it could have been the tiredness, but she gave off the impression that she was just going through the motions, attempting to act normal when I could definitely tell that she was anything but. The wine glass was now half full as she flopped into the couch, and she gazed at the television without actually viewing what was being shown on screen. Having no idea what to say, I stood at the doorway of the room. I had no idea what I was anticipating at the time. After that, she made her voice heard. The tone of her voice was lackluster and empty as she stated, "I don't know what to do anymore." As the words lingered in the air like a warning, I became completely still. This was a conversation that I had no clue was going to go in any particular direction, but it seemed like something I didn't want to hear. "May I ask what you mean?" As I inquired, my heart rate began to quicken. Her eyes passed across to me, and for a little instant I was under the impression that I saw a trace of vulnerability. "It's just that I don't know. I feel like I've lost myself. And I'm not even sure if I'm still attracted to you. I'm just not sure at all." I felt as though I had been punched in the gut by the words. When I first heard it, I was completely at a loss for words. As I stood there, I was trying to make sense of what she had just said. Simply put, it was illogical. Even when it seemed as though we were moving farther and more away, we had always been able to keep things going, despite the fact that we had been together for years and had experienced both highs and lows. On the other hand, this was not the same. In this case, it wasn't simply about the tension that we experience on a daily basis, or about our routine being monotonous and predictable. She was revealing something profound, something that caused me to doubt all that I had ever believed. I had something that I wanted to express. My intention was to assure her that she was mistaken, that it was just the wine talking, and that we could find a solution to this problem. However, it was evident from her look that she was not waiting for me to make any changes since she appeared remote and almost resigned. A simple attraction was not the only factor. This was about something else entirely. She continued, her words becoming a bit slurred as she spoke. I don't know why I feel this way, she said. To be honest, I have no idea how we arrived at this point, but I just can't pretend anymore. While shaking her head, she let forth a cynical chuckle. I was under the impression that I could, but I am unable to. I am sorry, but I was at a loss for words, and as a result, I held my tongue. At the same time that I wanted to reassure her and let her know that I understood, the reality was that I did not. What do you mean? What could I possibly comprehend that I had no idea was about to happen? How was it possible for me to comprehend a betrayal that was not even about another person, but about myself all along? She took another sip from her glass while gazing off into the distance, as if she were at a distant location where she was not present. She murmured, "You definitely are a good guy." "You truly are, but I simply don't know what to say about it. There are times when I don't even know whether I like myself anymore, let alone anybody else." I was able to feel the weight of her words weighing down on me, and it was thick and stifling. Her words hung there unanswered, and I could feel them. My chest became very taut. The amount of time I had spent trying to make things work, trying to demonstrate to her that I was still here and still devoted, was a significant amount. However, at that very time, it seemed as though nothing I had done was significant. I was experiencing a peculiar mixture of rage and sadness that was growing inside of me. I don't understand how she could say something like that in such a casual manner without even contemplating the consequences. The years of hard work, the memories, and the peaceful times that we spent together. Was there any significance to any of it? Had I lost any significance to her at this point? Afterwards, in a peculiar manner, I began to experience the numbness taking control of my body. It seemed as though my body was trying to shield me from the agony by shutting down, digesting the shock, and attempting to heal itself. I was aware that I ought to be expressing myself, asking questions, and making an effort to comprehend, but I was unable to do so. As a result of the dense quiet that existed between us, my thoughts were disorganized. I am unable to recall how long we were seated there, her drinking more and me standing across the room, unable to move because I was so startled. She fell asleep at some time, the wine glass still in her hand and the empty bottle sitting next to her on the table both being in her possession. As I stood there in the faint light, I had the disturbing impression that I was observing an unknown person in my own home. In front of me stood my wife, the lady with whom I had constructed my life. However, at that very time, she experienced a feeling of being so far away and so unapproachable. I was unable to remain there. Not any longer. I quickly grabbed my coat, which felt icy on my skin, and I stealthily exited the building without uttering a single word. Although I was unsure of where I was going or what I would do once I arrived at my destination, I was aware that I needed to get away. After hearing what she had to say, I could not bear to stay in that house any longer, nor could I accept being in her presence any longer. So I left, and I didn't turn around to look back. The next day, I did not go back to my house. This is the first update. While I was attempting to figure out what I should do next, I tried to stay in a tiny motel. The weight of the decision I'd made reached me slowly, like a wave coming in after I had already stepped out of the water. I felt numb, and the weight of the decision I'd made hit me slowly. At this point, I was unsure of what the appropriate course of action was. However, I am still unsure. The first few days seemed to take place in a haze. I spent the most of my time in that hotel room looking at the walls, attempting to make sense of everything that was going on. In addition, I did not have a specific destination in mind. Her presence was stifling me like a weight that I couldn't shrug off, and I simply wanted some space to breathe without the continual pressure of her gaze on me. I needed to be able to breathe freely. There was a lack of activity in the days that followed my departure. Overly silent. My mind kept going back to that particular instant, and each time I did so, her words reverberated more loudly. At this point, I am no longer attracted to you. What had brought us to this point? I was completely unaware of all the signals. She had been more distant over the course of the preceding few months. Was this the reason? Do you have to stay late at work? Instead, Was it anything that I had done? Or, even more terrible, something that I had chosen not to do? It was something I didn't want to give too much thought to. I am unable to. However, that bothered me. To the extent that I attempted to push it down, it continued to reappear, much like a dam that was on the verge of breaking. My phone was not on. I did not send an SMS. I was unable to come to terms with it. Whenever I considered making contact with someone, my thoughts were completely blank. I don't even know what to say. Is there any way that this might be fixed? Were there any things that were even worth saving? Before, I had put in a lot of effort and tried a lot of various things in an effort to get us to work. But what if this was the end? What if this was the reality that I had been shielding myself from for so long? Perhaps we had both merely arrived at the end of the line at the same time. It's possible that her sentiments had been deteriorating for a long time before she confessed it, but I was the one who failed to see it. I made an effort to divert my attention, to fill the wasted time by plunging into my job, by catching up on things that I had been avoiding, and by doing anything else that might dull the pain. But nothing was successful. It was impossible to sleep in that hotel room because there was such a deafening stillness, and whenever I closed my eyes, I saw her face. Her eyes, which were icy and distant, showed that she was already a stranger to her. It was the next week that I went back to the flat. Entering the building again was an odd experience. It felt suffocating in a new sense now that the stillness was present. It wasn't simply that she wasn't there. There was a darkness that I was unable to escape, and it was the weight of her confession that was hanging in the air. She was there, sitting on the couch with her head in her hands, as if she had been waiting for me to arrive. As I entered the room, she glanced up, her eyes swollen and displaying a mixture of embarrassment and something else that I was unable to identify. She hadn't departed, which was a surprise to me. A portion of me had anticipated that she would gather her belongings and vanish. "You have returned," she whispered in a low voice, scarcely raising her voice above a whisper. Honestly, I was at a loss for words. I just couldn't bring myself to pretend that everything was going according to plan. As if it were a live wire, the tension that existed between us was something that I did not want to touch. I said, my voice sounding more empty than I had wanted it to be, that I needed to grab my stuff. It was not necessary for me to express myself. Both of us were aware of what this was. The air was dense and oppressive to breathe. The moment she stood up, her eyes darted about the room as if she was unsure of where to gaze specifically. The words, "I'm sorry," came out of her mouth as her voice faintly broke. "To harm you was never my intention." Please halt." My interruption was abrupt, and my comments slashed through the air like a knife. I do not wish to be exposed to it at this moment. I am not sure what it is that you anticipate from me, but please do not make this more difficult than it already is. She winced, but she did not retreat from the situation. Just standing there, her expression was completely inscrutable. I was aware of how much she was struggling and how much she desired to make things better, but I was unsure whether or not I could allow her to do so. We were both simply standing there in quiet for what seemed like an interminable amount of time. My thoughts were filling up with all that she had said and everything that I had discovered. It was impossible for me to forget about it or to ignore it. I had the impression that I could deal with it, but now that I was here, it seemed like it was too real. Eventually, I mumbled, "I'm not sure if I'll be able to pull this off." Whether it was regret, rage, grief, or even all of these emotions at the same time, my words were thick with something that I couldn't describe. I am not sure if I will be able to mend us. As for me, I'm not even sure whether I want to. She felt as though the words had struck her like a blow to the stomach. Initially, she did not make any kind of statement. The only thing she did was stare at me, and her face was pale, as if she was trying to figure out how to react to something that had already been determined. The reality was revealed. As we were on the precipice of something that we could not go back from, we were trapped. "You want to leave, don't you?" With a voice that was hardly audible, she inquired. Initially, I did not respond to anyone. It was unclear to me whether she was asking me to go because she genuinely desired for me to do so or because she'd just want a fresh start. Regardless of the circumstances, I received the impression that I was no longer welcome in this location. This was not the house that I had thought I had. It turned out that this was not the partnership in which I had put all of my faith. I believe that it is necessary for me to. My voice remained calm despite the roaring tempest that was occurring inside of me. I believe that the moment has come. I did not wait for her to speak any further before continuing. I made a U-turn and proceeded back to the bedroom where I began to gather my belongings. Even though I was familiar with the flat, it felt weird to me now, like if it were a location that I had forgotten about. All of the things that I had previously connected with comfort, such as the bed, the sofa, and the kitchen, suddenly felt strange to me. The weight of her presence was so heavy that I could not bear it. She remained in the living room. To be honest, I didn't even want to look at her. I am unable to. Not at this time. Not in light of everything that she had revealed. After I had done packing, I went ahead and got my luggage and made my way to the entrance. As she continued to sit there, her expression remained expressionless, as if she had been frozen in time. Our parting was hardly a farewell. There was no requirement for us to do so. Nothing further could be said at that point. My departure from the apartment was marked by a sense of finality that I had not anticipated as the door clicked shut behind me. It was unclear to me where I was headed or what the next step would be. However, I was aware that I needed to depart. I was aware that I could not continue to be in that location with her any longer. It has been a few days since I departed, and the second update is an asterisk. I am still trying to figure out what the next step is. Every day seems to be a peculiar combination of the feelings of relief and bewilderment. I can't help but believe that when I wake up, everything will be back to normal, but it hasn't taken place yet. And I'm not quite certain that I want it to happen. A peculiar mixture of numbness and resentment characterized the days that followed my departure. Despite the fact that I moved about quite a bit, staying with a friend for a time and then in a hotel for a few days, the stillness was always present wherever I went. It seemed like the correct choice to go, but at the same time, it was the wrong choice. It was impossible to make a clean split from the life that we had constructed, and there was no fast answer to the many years that had gone. I was under the impression that I was walking in a fog and I had no idea where I was going. I was constantly reminding myself that I had made the best decision. In a relationship when my spouse no longer felt the same way about me, how could I continue to be in that relationship? However, it was a test. It is really difficult. Whenever I looked at my phone, I couldn't help but think about checking her messages. I wondered if she had reached out to me, and I wondered whether she was also attempting to find a solution to this problem. Still, I did not. I am unable to. Not at this time. I was not prepared. In the middle of the night, after a week had passed, I found myself sitting in a little cafe, nursing a cup of coffee that had been cold for a considerable amount of time. I did not feel hungry. I was simply zoning out, allowing the buzz of the restaurant and the muted talk of the few other late-night customers to fill the stillness. I wasn't really thinking about anything in particular. I was just zoning out. Before I heard the buzzing sound, I had been looking at the screen of my phone, idly scrolling through old images. I had no idea that I had been doing this. The only message. Her name appeared on the screen, she said. For a considerable amount of time, I remained fixated on it, my finger hanging over the notice. Despite the fact that it was a straightforward text, I could feel the weight of it in my chest. It was very close to being closed, but I did it. Let's have a conversation, asterisk. I beg you, my sincere apologies for everything. Although I am aware that I have made a mistake, I do not wish to lose you. Because of you, I am unable to solve this. The asterisk. I read it again and over again, which felt like a hefty hammer slamming me in the chest with each repetition. A range of feelings, including confusion, rage, grief, and desire, surfaced at that moment. In addition to it, there was something more. Despite everything, there was a part of me that still wanted to believe her regardless of the fact that I could sense her agony and the remorse in her words. My thoughts began to spiral out of control as I continued to gaze at the message until the words began to blend together. To what end did I seek? At this point, what exactly was it that I need from her? I wasn't sure whether I could put my faith in her once more. Is it possible for me to forgive her for what she says? When I look at her, will I ever be able to do it again? I scratched my face and placed the phone down, all the while attempting to take a breath. During that evening, I did not answer. I was not prepared to contend with her. No, I wasn't certain that I would ever be. But I was aware that I could not continue to put off facing the reality indefinitely. On the next day, I discovered that I was once again standing outside of the flat. I simply did not know what I was anticipating. Nevertheless, I was aware of it the moment I rang the bell and saw her standing there, appearing to be so little in the doorway. It was not yet time for me to forgive her. I was not even certain that I wanted to do it, but there was a part of me that longed to comprehend the reason. For the purpose of determining whether or not there was any truth to what we had in the past, I wanted to hear it from her. Her eyes were red from crying, and her look was a mixture of hope and terror. She got up and walked away without uttering a single word. Upon entering, I followed her, and the quiet that around us was much more oppressive than it had been the first time I had entered after leaving. She avoided making eye contact with me. Immediately after guiding me into the living area, she sat down and wrung her hands nervously. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling behind her hand. "It was a mistake on my part to say such things. To harm you was never my intention. I had been drinking, and I was feeling angry with myself for everything that I had been trying to avoid. It was at this time that I was attempting to figure out who I am that I caused you pain." I was at a loss for words as I stood guard outside the entrance. Despite the fact that they were kind and filled with sadness, her remarks had a hollow quality to them, as if they were attempting to conceal something more profound. Now, I had no notion what it was that she wanted from me. Were she under the impression that we could simply resume up where we left off? Is it possible that she was simply trying to bring an end to a chapter that she couldn't bear to leave unfinished? If I were to forgive you, I would not be able to. Despite the fact that I did not intend for the words to be conclusive, I delivered them with a definitive tone. When it came to forgiving myself, I wasn't even sure whether I could forgive her. "You communicated to me that you no longer felt any attraction to me. How do you get back on your feet after that?" Suddenly, she jerked back, feeling the weight of her own words hitting her as well. "It was not my intention. It is a lie on my part." On the other hand, I was completely disoriented by everything. "I had no idea who I was," I said. "I was under the impression that I could fix myself on my own, but I was wrong. And now I have an understanding. It was never appropriate for me to push you away." I let her remarks to rest in the air between us during the delay that occurred between us. I observed her, and for the first time in several days, I looked at her in greater detail. She appeared worn out and full of exhaustion. When I looked back on the lady I had married, the one who had previously gazed at me as if I were everything, she appeared to be a pale imitation of the person I had recalled. It wasn't this that I was anticipating, but I wasn't sure what I was expecting. I was not anticipating her to feel this way, to appear to be in such a state of disarray. As for me, I was clueless about how to solve it. I've finally come to the conclusion that I don't know whether I can go back to the way things were. It is not clear to me if we can simply act as if nothing has occurred. This caused her hands to shake, and she shook her head. "Please don't act like you don't care. I only want to make it right. It is not my intention to lose you." I was unable to take my eyes off of her as the impact of her words engulfed me. The part of me that had been buried wanted to trust her, but my mind was screaming at me to go, to protect myself. However, there was another part of me that wanted to believe her. There may have been a history between us, or it could have been the loneliness that we had experienced over the preceding week. Not sure about it. "It's possible that we require some time," I said, the words like a precarious lifeline. "Perhaps we both require some time to figure out what it is that we truly desire." Her countenance was a mixture of relief and anguish as she nodded her head. "Anything you require, I will provide for you. It is not my intention to hurry you. I would like you to know that I am truly sorry. When you are ready, I will be here waiting for you." I had no idea what was going to take place after that. What I didn't know was whether or not we would be able to reconstruct what we had in the past, or whether we would simply wind up growing more apart. After what seemed like days, I finally had the feeling that perhaps there was a way to move on. Perhaps there was a glimmer of optimism. Do you think we could begin again? It's also possible that we'd just let go and figure out how to move on. In any case, it would be a waiting game. However, for the very first time, I found that I no longer clung to that fear. I only needed to determine what it was that I want. Note the 3 asterisks. A couple of weeks have passed since I last spoke with her. Despite the fact that we have been giving each other space, the situation differs today, as if we are both just waiting for the next step to present itself. Despite the fact that I am still unsure of what is ahead, I am beginning to believe that perhaps, just possibly, we will be able to learn what lies ahead. Alternately, perhaps it is time to say goodbye for good. Let's just wait and see.